What's going on, everybody? It's etaprime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the most powerful ARM-based handheld that Anbernic has ever released. This is known as the RG505, and we do have some really awesome built-in features with this one. And in terms of raw performance, this is going to beat out any of their other ARM devices they have on the market right now. Really, when it comes down to it, the only other device they've released that does come in with a little more power than this one is the Win600, but that's an x86 chip. It runs Windows. With the RG505, at least at the time of making this video, we've got 3 color options. I've got the turquoise here, but they also offer yellow and gray, and this is definitely my favorite one out of the color options they're offering right now. Now, one of my favorite things about this handheld is the display they chose to use. This is actually using the same display from the OLED PS Vita. So we've got a really nice touch screen here, and this only runs Android. Given the chipset they're using here, we're running Android 12, and they have sent out a new OTA update, which does include Google Play. Initially, when these were sent out to reviewers, they didn't have Google Play installed, and that was kind of a big letdown for a lot of people, especially in the States. When it comes to Google Play, it does make it really easy to download our games. But other than that, there are games that actually require Google Play services to function correctly in Android. And I've actually had a chance to mess around with this for about the last 8 days. I actually didn't do my initial review because of the fact we didn't have Google Play installed, and a lot of people were pushing for it. But now with the latest update, we've got full access to Google Play and Google Play services. Now, when it comes to the layout, we've seen this design with other Anbernic devices. It does work out really well. We've got dual analog sticks here, and one of the great things about this new RG505 is they opted to use Hall sensor analog sticks. Now, they're not the full-size analog sticks to keep the size down on the whole unit itself. These are the smaller Hall sensor joysticks on par with the size of the Joy-Con joystick. So, some people aren't into these. Personally, I've gotten used to using the larger ones and the smaller ones. It really doesn't make a difference to me. And since we have those Hall effect sensors, we don't have to worry about any kind of stick drift down the road. And in my opinion, I think they feel a little better than the stock analog sticks that they usually use in something like this. And the overall accuracy is much better. Now, taking a look around the device, on the bottom here, we've got our dual stereo speakers, our power button right in the middle, and a micro SD card. But keep in mind, this also has 128 gigabytes of internal eMMC storage. Taking a look up top here, we've got a 3.5mm audio jack and our USB Type-C port. Now, this will work for charging the internal battery or syncing this up to a PC. Now, when it comes to the specs of the new RG505, for the CPU, we've got the Unisoc T618. We've actually seen this in several tablets in 2021 and 2022. Plus, there have been a couple handhelds that have hit the market with this same chip. But it's an 8-core ARM CPU. We've got 2 Cortex A75 cores at 2 GHz and 6 A55 cores at 2 GHz. When it comes to the GPU, we've got the Mali G52 MP2 at 850 MHz, and this is really what makes a huge difference when you compare it to the older Rockchip CPUs they were using in their other handhelds. The display is a 4.95-inch OLED, and this is the same display that was used in the original PS Vita. We've got a resolution of 960 by 544, 128 gigabytes of eMMC 5.1 storage built in, plus we've got micro SD card support. It's got a 5,000 mAh battery, and I've been averaging 6.5 hours of gameplay out of this. You could probably stretch it a little more by lowering the brightness, but usually when I do my testing, I'm at 100% brightness here, and 6.5 hours isn't bad at all. Like we mentioned, it's got those Hall sensor-based joysticks. It's also got a built-in 6-axis gyro, and this is running Android 12, and with the latest update, we do have access to Google Play. So first things first, we need to get the elephant out of the room, the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus versus the RG505. Now, this is very subjective. It's really just my opinion. If you're not familiar with the Pocket 3 Plus, we've got the same exact CPU, same amount of RAM. We've got a different screen, different analog sticks, and a whole different design. Now, when it comes down to it, these are going to perform exactly the same. Even when it comes to battery life, you can expect 6 to 7 hours of battery life out of either one of these. Since they're using that same Unisoc T618 CPU, we're going to get the same emulation and native Android gaming performance out of both of these. Neither one of these is overclocked or anything like that, and both of them actually have really great thermals. While running a stress test on either one of these devices, we don't hit thermal throttle even after 20 minutes of testing. And pricing is also right on par with each other, at least at the launch of the RG505. Right now, over on their website, you can pick up the RG505 for $147.99, and the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus is $149.99. Now, at least for me, I do like the design and the feel of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus over the RG505. But when you consider what we've got here built in with that RG505, it's actually going to make it a really tough decision. I do like the screen on the 505 much better. We've got that OLED from the Vita, always been a big fan of this. It is coming in with a lower resolution, but on these smaller screen devices, it's really hard to tell. The 505 also has those Hall sensor-based analog sticks built in. The Pocket 3 doesn't. And when it comes down to it, Anbernic's D-pads on these ARM devices are pretty much unmatched across the board. They do have the best D-pad in my opinion. But again, I do prefer the look and the feel of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus over the RG505. I also wanted to show off some benchmarks that I ran on both of these devices, and first up we've got Geekbench 5. Now these are right on par with each other. If I was to run this a couple more times on each of these devices, I mean, one might beat out the other would come ahead a little bit, but we're working with that same CPU, the Unisoc T618. I also ran a couple GPU benchmarks, and first up we've got 3D Mark Slingshot. As you can see, the Pocket 3 came ahead by just a bit, but as soon as I tested Wildlife, the RG505 came ahead. And like I mentioned, if I was to run this again a couple times on these devices, I mean, one would come ahead, one would come behind, but it was really no clear winner here on which one is scoring higher in these benchmarks because, again, same exact CPU. Taking a look at the 505's operating system, obviously we've got Android here. It can be navigated totally with the built-in controls, but we also have this touch screen. And if you do end up getting one of these devices, first thing you need to do is just run the built-in updater. That way you can get on the latest version and have Google Play, because some of these might ship without it, having that older firmware. So just make sure you're up to date so you can get access to that. And if you wanted to install a third-party launcher just to run all of your games from, you could do it. Or you could use their built-in retro launcher. Now I do wish we had more customization with the launcher itself, but it is pretty simple to use. You can just point each one of these emulators to a specific location on the SD card or the internal storage and it'll scan for your games. We'll go into N64 here, and I just didn't add any artwork yet, but we can go ahead and start up a game directly from here. Just makes it really easy to keep everything organized. But since we're running Android, we do have options. You could either sideload your favorite front end, or you could get something from Google Play if you don't want to use this one. Now the first thing I really wanted to test out was just some native Android games. We can basically install anything we want, and this chipset actually does work pretty well with a lot of the stuff that I've tested. Here's Dead Cells, not a super hard game to run, but it's still really fun, and it's worth installing or, picking up from Google Play if you don't already have it. I've got the PC version also, and I've probably played it on mobile a lot more. And with the RG505, you're not going to have any issues with a game like this. Next up, we've got Call of Duty Mobile, low settings, and I've got the frame rate set to high, so we should be running at about 60 FPS, and there's really no reason this game shouldn't run at 60 on this device here. And you might notice that I am using the built-in controls here, but this is because I've used the built-in mapper. Now when it comes to Call of Duty Mobile, Apex Legends, it only works with first-party controllers, but with the built-in mapper, we can actually set this up to use the built-in controls with basically any game. We're going to map these on-screen touch points to the physical controls, and yeah, it does work pretty well. Next thing I wanted to take a look at was some game streaming. We do have AC Wi-Fi built in here, and personally I like using Steam Link. This will actually stream from my own PC, and I've got it set up for the beautiful quality. I've also got it set for 60 FPS and 720p. And I can run a network test here, and I get around 100 megabits per second, which is plenty for streaming at 60 FPS. We could even go up to 1080p, but we're limited by the screen resolution of the handheld itself. Now this is different from cloud gaming because I'm not streaming from somebody else's servers. This is in-home, and I've had really good luck with Steam Link, but you could also go with Moonlight if you wanted to. Now it's time to check out some emulation, and first up we've got Dreamcast. I'm using the Redream emulator. It does work really well on the RG505. I am upscaled, and while we're here I figured I'd go ahead and test out this D-pad. And I've always been a big fan of their D-pads. They've had a lot of time to kind of perfect it, and yeah, it's working just as well as it has on their other ones. I can pull off these special moves, no problem at all. And when it comes to Dreamcast emulation, as long as the game's compatible with the Redream emulator, it's going to play it at full speed. We do have more than enough power here. Another emulator that works absolutely amazingly on this device with this chipset is PSP. I've got the standalone version of PPSSPP, Vulkan backend, 3x resolution with Tekken 6. But Tekken 6 isn't the hardest one to emulate, so let's go ahead and move over to Chains of Olympus. And with this one, instead of 3x, we did have to drop it down to 2x, but the T618 does handle these games really well. And, some easier to emulate stuff, you could even go up to 4x, but again, we're kind of limited by the screen's resolution. But overall, it is great to see even these harder to emulate games running on one of these handhelds. But I gotta say, one of the most impressive things about this device and others powered by this chipset is the ability to play some GameCube and Wii games. Now, you don't go out and buy one of these specifically for GameCube and Wii. We're still lacking a lot of power that's needed for the harder to emulate games, but there's quite a few titles that are going to be fully playable on this device using something like Dolphin MMJR. Now, I will admit that this emulator does use a lot more hacks than, let's say, the official version of Dolphin, but in order to get these games to run at full speed or a decent frame rate on lower-end devices, that's kind of what's needed. But either way you look at it, it's still pretty impressive to see these GameCube games running on a device like this. I mean, I was kind of blown away that we were able to do any of these games. And the final thing I wanted to test out here was some PS2 emulation using EtherSX2. So with this emulator, there's a bunch of hacks that we can use in the background, but with these easier to emulate games, we actually don't need any of them. Here's Crash Bandicoot, Wrath of Cortex, 1x resolution, Vulkan backend, running at full speed, but it is an easier one to emulate. Next up, we've got Kingdom Hearts 2. Same thing here, Vulkan backend, 1x, and this game is also fully playable on the RG505. And all of this really comes down to the emulator itself. It really is a great emulator. It's come a long way in a very short period of time. But kind of just like GameCube, this isn't a device that you specifically buy for PS2 emulation either. Because when we move up to the harder to emulate games like God of War 2 and even Gran Turismo 4, it really does fall on its face. And this is kind of a given, with the chipset we're using here. Gran Turismo 4, 0.5x resolution, so we're under native, and we do have some cycle skips going on, and we just can't get a steady frame rate out of this game. Now, we could go a little further with it with the cycle skips, or even go to unsafe mode with the emulator itself, but this is one of those games you'll never get to run at 60 FPS on a device like this. Kind of the same with God of War 2. So overall, the RG505 is the most powerful ARM device that they've released, but just like a lot of these companies out there, I think the main thing they need to focus on next is software. Now, I completely understand that the software development itself isn't going to make these companies more money. Releasing another handheld is what's going to make them money, but having that software ready for the next launch is going to make that launch much smoother. And in turn, it's going to compel more people to buy that device. Right now, where we're at with these handhelds, I think we do have some pretty solid hardware. Now, it would be nice to have a more powerful chip, but I know for sure that we could get more out of the hardware we have right now with some software optimizations. So to recap, I think the RG505 does have a lot going for it. Personally, I really do like this display. Not the highest resolution one that we've seen, and text can get a bit blurry in some situations, but I love the fact that we've got that OLED display, and I personally think it still looks really good, especially for retro gaming. We've got those Hall-based analog sticks here, and an awesome D-pad like always with their devices. Great battery life, coming in at 6 to 7 hours on a handheld like this is really good. And of course, when it comes to emulation, awesome Dreamcast, PSP, this will do Sega Saturn, N64. We really didn't see anything lower than Dreamcast because it's going to run it just fine. And we also have the added benefit of being able to play some GameCube, Wii, and PS2 games on this device. But in the end, it's really up to you. If you're interested in learning more about the RG505 or maybe picking one up, I'll leave some links in the description, and I'd also like to know what you think about this device in the comments below. Is this something you might pick up? Are you going to skip it? Wait till the next one? Let me know down below, and like always, thanks for watching.